I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Toyota Yaris Cross. Well, for Toyota, the release of the RAV4 hybrid mid-size SUV here in Australia has been a total party, and they're hoping to do it all again with this, the Yaris Cross. Their first real competitor in what is known in Australia as the light SUV segment. This is really just very small SUVs, cars like the Mazda CX-3, the new Volkswagen T-Cross, and now the Toyota Yaris Cross, which comes in hybrid. In fact, most of the variants for Australia are hybrid. You can get a price leader, naturally aspirated petrol 3-cylinder, but this one is the car that I think most people are going to want to buy. The GXL Hybrid, $31,990 plus on-road costs. We will be running one of these as a long-termer. It may even be this exact car and colour. I'm not sure yet, but the reason for that is because essentially Australian buyers can't get enough of these Toyota branded hybrid SUVs, and it's pretty easy to see why. They drive way better than the previous generation of Toyotas used to, thanks to their new platform and Akio Toyota's commitment to no longer making boring cars. And they make it very, very easy to use less fuel and shrink the size of your CO2 footprint without really having to do anything. The beauty of a series parallel hybrid, or as Toyota in some markets calls them, a self-charging hybrid, is just that. You don't have to plug in this car. Of course, that means it never really runs in electric only mode apart from for very short stints, but it does mean that your real world fuel consumption is always going to be low no matter whether you charge it or not. And it just works, just like it did in the RAV4 hybrid, it does here as well. But we'll take this car for a drive in a minute. First of all, let's talk about this interior, because you'll remember when I reviewed the new Yaris hatchback recently, I was pretty unimpressed because that car took a huge price hike and the interior was really nothing to write home about. And interestingly, the Yaris Cross is actually a slightly better car in every way, including here in the interior, because we do get some plusher materials in this car, and it feels about on a par with what the Volkswagen Group put out in their cheaper European market vehicles. And that's a compliment, because it's well built. There are some soft materials where you'd want them, a standard leather steering wheel that feels really good in the hand, and the layout makes sense. It's still not very interesting in here. It's pretty conservative to look at, but everything is where you would expect it to be, and it's all functional. So it starts with this standard 7-inch touchscreen. The actual screen itself is a little small, whereas the bezel is quite large, so I kind of wish they'd done an 8 or a 9-inch screen in there, but you can't have everything. In the GXL, you get integrated navigation, but every Yaris Cross has this screen, DAB radio, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto if you plug them in. And you only get one USB port. That's weird in 2020/2021. In the top spec car, you do get 2 USB ports, but that really should be standard. In front of the driver, you have quite a cool instrument cluster. You have fixed gauges here for your gear position, your hybrid power versus charging meter, that's a tachometer on the petrol, and a speedo, digital speedo over here. They look good, and they free up space for this color trip computer, which is actually pretty comprehensive with your navigation and media information in between them. Looks good, works well. The steering wheel is a really small size, so it makes this car particularly tossable through the wheel. As we'll find out, it pairs well to the handling of this car, which is a lot better than it has any right to be. In terms of practicality, it's also not bad. We have a little shelf here inspired by the RAV4 and the Kluger or Highlander. More storage down here. No wireless phone charging though. You can get it on the top spec car, but if this car starts with a 3, as it does, it should be standard. Cup holders down here, still the lack of an armrest, which I hate. That's a real nickel-dimey thing about the Toyota Yaris. An armrest in a car that costs over 30 grand is should be standard. It's crazy that it isn't. But the door bins are quite generous. Overall, it's a comfortable layout here. It's a good layout, decent seats. They get a little tiring after several hours in the saddle, but nothing out of the ordinary. All in all, I quite like the front cabin of this car. Let's check out those back seats next. So the door could open a little bit wider, but room on offer here in the back is pretty well par for the course for this very small SUV segment. And that means that I fit, though it's never going to be massively comfortable. Now I'm 6 foot tall, headroom, I've got another inch, leg room, I've got a couple of inches, and toe room's actually pretty good. Now the floor is almost flat, so at an absolute pinch, you could get someone in the middle, but it's a bit of a perch. So consider this car a 4-seater, or of course, you know, for most people, it'll just be singles or couples in a car like this. Space for a gym bag or a pet here in the second row is more realistic, especially since there isn't air vents. So Fido won't appreciate that, and your friends won't either. But it's kind of what we usually see in a car like this, unfortunately. All harsh materials back here, sadly. No armrest between the seats, but this car does have 40-20-40 folding rear seats, which is cool, and you do have cup holders there, so you kind of have this ghetto armrest if you like, but it does give you flexibility to store long items through here nice and easily, and you still keep 4 seats. So that is actually quite clever and appreciated. All in all, quite good storage, good room here in the back. Speaking of storage, let's have a look at the boot. Moving around the back of the Yaris Cross, I think it's a pretty cute little machine. I'm not too sure about this flat blue paintwork. I was driving a silver one over the weekend and I quite like the look of it actually. I kind of like the look of it better than the normal Yaris. And if you do go for the urban top spec car, it can get a bit expensive, but you can get a black roof with it, which looks pretty mean, plus 18-inch wheels. This one runs on 16s. Opening the tailgate, which is manual in the GX and the GXL, but it's fine, this is a tiny car. We've got a good amount of room. 390 litres of space. It's quite competitive, bigger than a Volkswagen Golf, a lot bigger than a Toyota Corolla, which is meant to be a size up from this in the hatchback shape. Now, if you go for the hybrid all-wheel drive version, which costs 3 grand more than the hybrid, the boot space does fall to 317 litres because not only are they packaging the additional electric motor at the back, but also a multi-link independent rear suspension. You just get a torsion beam rear suspension on the 2-wheel drive variants, but as I find out in a sec, that's fine because they've done it really well. Bit of storage off to the left and right of the boot floor there. You can see we've got our bags back here with no trouble. Closing it, you can do it manually. It's not that big of a problem. So, cleverly packaged little car. Let's see how it drives. So, what's the Toyota Yaris Cross like to drive? Well, I've already hinted earlier in the video that this thing handles really well and the hybrid system works well. So it's kind of like a smaller version of the RAV4 midsizer that pretty much everybody's been quite impressed with in its latest generation. But this is the first generation of Yaris Cross. We don't really have that many huge reference points for it, apart from the fact it is, you know, effectively a raised and cladded Yaris, and it runs on the same TNGA B platform as that car, and that's a pretty good place to start from because TNGA is a good rigid chassis, pretty light, and it's a lot more sophisticated than the platform that the old Yaris rode on and made that car fairly average in every single dimension. By contrast, the Yaris Cross really sparkles. It's actually quite a lovely thing to drive. Now there is a petrol base engine, 1.5 litre naturally aspirated 3-cylinder, 88 kilowatts of power, 145 Newton meters of torque, and it's fine. Fairly frugal, 6.5 litres per 100 kilometers was our tested real-world combined fuel economy. It's just a little slow on the freeway when you need to overtake someone, and it's pretty noisy, which makes the $2,000 upgrade to the hybrid seem like a no-brainer. Because while combined power falls to 85 kilowatts, torque, which Toyota don't state, is definitely up. The electric motor basically fills in the same way a small turbocharger would for this kind of engine. So you have more low-end torque, but the beauty is, when it can, the petrol engine switches off and the Yaris Cross runs under electric power. There's a small battery, there's a reasonably weak motor, but this is a light car, it doesn't require too much motivation, and the systems work incredibly well in tandem, and you don't have to do anything, it's all automated for you. Real-world fuel economy, under 5 litres per 100 kilometres reliably with the Yaris Cross Hybrid. You can do a lot better than that. You'll get close to the claim of 3.8 litres per 100 for the 2-wheel drive version if you try. I just didn't really try because with our real-world fuel economy tests, you know, we're not going for some kind of record. We're driving the car as you would normally in the burbs and on the commute, and I think that's a little more realistic. So the system works well, it saves you fuel, it feels about as good as a small turbo 3-cylinder engine, so the hybrid is really quite competitive. Personally, I wouldn't spend the extra 3 grand to get the triple motor hybrid, which adds one at the back for electric all-wheel drive. It's not as good as the beefier system in the RAV4 hybrid all-wheel drive that I ran as a long-termer, because with the 1.5 litre petrol engine, the all-wheel drive system only works under 70 kilometers per hour, and you don't get a spare wheel, so that kind of feels like the worst of both worlds. Like if you're going to do high-speed work on gravel, you probably want a spare and all-wheel drive, so I would just go for the front-wheel drive hybrid. That seems to be the Goldilocks option in this range. So that's powertrains. Ride and handling though are the real standout for the Yaris Cross. Now on these 16-inch wheels, they maybe look a tiny bit small, but they deliver a really good supple ride quality. Still good firmness, good road feel, but never intrusion or crashiness, even with the simple torsion beam rear suspension in the two-wheel drive cars. The ride has been done really well, and the handling is better. The steering is surprisingly feelsome, quick, direct, intuitive, good ratio. Is this a small Toyota? I mean, we certainly weren't talking about cars like this way even 5 years ago, and yet Toyota have put in a concerted effort to make improvements, and it has paid off. And the Yaris Cross, it handles like it's a hot hatch, even though it doesn't have the engine or the motivation to back it up. That's okay. It's still an absolute hoot. It absolutely jumps for apexes. It has reasonably grippy Bridgestone Turanza rubber, and you just feel the whole car moving around beneath you when you start to dial up the assertiveness in the corners. So for people that just need transport, the Yaris Cross is comfy, easy to drive and frugal, but for the keen drivers among us, there is actually a lot of talent underneath this chassis to tap into, and I think that makes for a great car. That, in essence, is why every motoring journalist thinks the Volkswagen Golf is so good, because it can do those two things well, and the Toyota Yaris Cross is a car in exactly the same attitude, I suppose. So well done, Toyota, on that. Now, refinement's all right. You can hear when the petrol engine is working in the hybrid, you do hear it, but because the electric torque is almost always sort of burbling away under the surface, the engine doesn't have to reach for the stars in the same way the naturally aspirated version does. It's not too vibey. You can tell it's a 3-cylinder, but it's not too bad. Visibility out is really good. This car's pretty boxy. The windows are big, the mirrors are big. And adaptive safety is impressive because Toyota want this thing to get a 5-star rating. So we've got a center airbag here. We've got AEB that can detect cars, pedestrians, cyclists, and oncoming traffic at junctions. So it has the new junction AEB feature. It's got really well-tuned lane keep assist with center tracing. Holds you nice and strongly in the middle of the lane. It detects Australia's soft-edged road edges really quite well, and doesn't sort of erroneously throw up AEB or forward collision warning when a car is parked on the side of the road, as some systems do. So all in all, there's a lot of effort that's going into this car. You can tell because it just works. So that's a look at the new Toyota Yaris Cross small SUV. Really, this car is a story of Toyota firing on all cylinders, not just the 3 cylinders in this car, but you know, metaphorically. This car incorporates all of that know-how about how to do hybrids so well, such that you never really have to think about it. It just saves you fuel, it adds torque, it's a good solution. Plus, the handling is better than it really needs to be in a car like this. It's genuinely fun to drive hard on a country road. And the packaging's not bad either. And when you consider all that new safety tech Toyota have to put in this thing in order to give it a 5-star crash rating, the price, it does make sense. At least it makes more sense to me than the Yaris hatch, which I think is wildly overpriced. The Yaris Cross is a better car all round, so it's not as hard to justify. And because you can get into a hybrid Yaris Cross for less than the hatch, you know, it's kind of easier to make the maths work, at least in my head. But let me know what you think about this car down below this video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.